And welcome to tonight's Town Council meeting of February, oh my gosh, I'm blanking, February 16, 2021. I hope everyone had a nice President's Day weekend, and we're calling the meeting to order. And Ms. Nace, if you could just do our roll call.
Thank you and good evening. Councilmember Risto.
Here.
Councilmember Hudas.
Here.
Councilmember Badami.
Here.
Vice Mayor Rennie.
Here.
Mayor and Chair Syak. Excuse me.
Here. Thank you. And before we begin, just wanted to remind everyone the order of tonight's meeting. We will have council and manager matters where we share activities that are of concern to our public as well as our council colleagues. We will go through consent, and if nothing gets pulled, we will approve those in one motion. Verbal communication is an opportunity for those in our attendees list to share items of concern or items that they would like for us to consider at a future meeting. But again, a reminder that it's not an opportunity to have a conversation or engage, but more informational items. And then we'll go into our mid-year budget projection and our 5-year forecast. So with that, I just will call on people one at a time. Vice Mayor Rennie, council matters.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. On February 10th, the Silicon Valley Clean Energy Authority Board met and we adjusted rates to maintain a discount relative to PG&E. It was effectively, we approved a reduction of the generation rate by 2.3% to take effect in March. And this is in anticipation of PG&E decreasing their generation rates and an increase in the power charge indifference adjustment, also known as the exit fee. The rate reduction will maintain the 1% discount relative to PG&E for our customers, inclusive of the added PCI fee. To date, we have Silicon Valley Clean Energy Authority has saved customers $69 million due to lower rates being offered by us. Also, the board approved energy from carbon-free hydropower with additional benefits starting in 2025. We will receive the carbon-free electricity from the Central Valley Project, which is a federal resource comprised of 20 hydroelectric dams such as Shasta, Trinity, Folsom, so forth. Silicon Valley Clean Energy will receive around 10,000 megawatts each year for 30 years. And that's enough to power 23,000 homes. We also, Silicon Valley Clean Energy customers and I think PG&E customers are moving to a time of use billing change in June of this year. Historically and currently, a majority of customers are billed on a tiered usage rate, which the prices electricity have been based on how much is used. In June, the customers will be opted into a time of use billing rate as part of this mandatory statewide transition. This changes electricity pricing from how much is used to when it is used, with higher prices from 4 o'clock to 9 o'clock. So people should be aware prices are going to go up from 4 to 9. The transition is part of an effort to better align electricity usage to when the grid has a higher penetration of renewables and help reduce that evening peak electricity demand. Let's see. On February 3rd, the Bay Area Air Quality Management Board met, and it was mostly focused on kind of educating the new board members. February 4th, I listened into the VTA board meeting as an alternate. Didn't see anything too exciting that of great interest to us. On February 5th, I listened in part of the Silicon Valley Clean Energy new board member orientation. Since I'm well familiar, I didn't stay for the whole meeting. And on 2/8, the Silicon Valley Clean Energy Authority Risk Oversight Committee met, and that we reviewed things such as the energy hedge positions, energy price trends, changes in legislative or regulatory issues. And on 2/8, I attended the Finance Commission with Matthew. We reviewed and commented on much of the material in tonight's agenda for the mid-year budget. although there have been some changes to the material since we saw it at the Finance Committee. On 2/11, I did a meet and greet with the new mood director. And on 2/11, I attended the VTA PAC, Policy Advisory Committee. There was more discussion on the Measure B 10-year spending, as we're aware of. The committee recommended the approval of the staff recommendation for innovative transit projects funding after some discussion on those projects, of inclusion of money for, I think the issue was more that most of the discussion was about the inclusion of more money for the RIDE program that we're familiar with here in Los Gatos. I'm wanting to expand it to San Jose and Morgan Hill. The issue was it wasn't considered very innovative, so it didn't make the minimum point scoring, but staff was recommending funding it anyway. Myself and several council members commented on how it fits a very important niche for transit-dependent older seniors. And let's see, also we discussed the VTA program to speed up transit through spreading out bus stops and priority at traffic signals and dedicated bus lanes. That's it.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. And thank you for sharing your SBCE notes via email to us as well. It helps to have it in front of us. Councilmember Risto.
I don't have anything major to report. I attended a number of meetings, including as an alternate behind Vice Mayor Rennie. The only thing I would mention is that along with Councilmember Badami, we participate in the general plan advisory update, and we'll be meeting this Thursday. That meeting's open to the public. And on the agenda will be the discussion of the revised initial draft community design element. And, you know, this will have an impact on where and what type of housing will be built. And so, you know, I encourage members of the public to either participate or write in, but look on the town website at the general plan update. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Hudes.
Let's see. On February 4th, I participated in the Cal Cities Economic Development Roundtable, where many cities were represented and talking about their challenges with tax revenue, particularly property tax, sales tax, and TOT. And that was good feedback and lead into the Finance Commission meeting that we had on the 8th. It was a very productive meeting, and we'll see a lot of the output of that first real session of that commission tonight. I did a site visit at Los Gatos Meadows Wood Road, and that's an item that's on the agenda tonight as a consent item. And then I met with the chair of the Community Health and Senior Services Commission and got a better appreciation of some of the needs for 60+ in our community on February 11th. And let's see, that's pretty much it. I think a lot of the finance issues are top of mind, and so having that contact with the community was very, very helpful.
Thank you. And Councilmember Badami.
Thank you, Mayor. On Thursday, February 4th, I attended 3 consecutive meetings. The first one being at 4 p.m. with the West Valley Clean Water Authority. Of concern is a proposed 20% rate hike to our water bills. The rationale being escalated expenses, some of which were cited as stringent water quality requirements, cybersecurity, data privacy mandates, and needed system infrastructure replacements. The rate hike is subject to approval by the California Public Utilities Commission, so residents, if opposed, can lodge their complaints with the commission accordingly. At 5 p.m., I met with the West Valley Solid Waste Management Authority, and of concern was low performance standards preceding the pandemic timeframe. low performance standards being cited as missed and double missed pickups. The authority assessed $21,385,000 in fines, graciously accepted by the West Valley Collection and Recycling with the promise to do better. At 7 p.m., along with Councilmember Risto, I attended the General Plan Update Advisory Committee. And as she mentioned, we did complete the land use element of the 2040 General Plan. And on Thursday night, we will begin discussion of the community design element. Thank you.
Thank you. And in addition to the meetings that have been reported by my council colleagues, those that are worthy of sharing, I participated in several cities association meetings. At the last recent public hearing, we had a presentation by the CEO of Silicon Valley Clean Energy. There was a presentation by all of the Chamber of Commerces, and our very own executive director, Catherine Summers, was one of the participants and speakers that evening. And we did get an update on the housing collaborative that all cities are participating with. For my council colleagues, we still have opportunities if you're interested to participate on the subcommittees for COVID response, transportation, and social justice. And so if you are interested, please reach out to Andy Jordan. Those are the 3 remaining committees. Housing, as you can imagine, filled up quite quickly, but those other committees do have slots still. And in addition, the mayors continue to work with the county. The Saturday calls continue. Our assistant town manager participated this past Saturday. And one of the items that we are currently working on that we are hoping to send out immediately is a letter that is going to be signed by all 15 mayors to the county, asking that teachers increase their priority status on the vaccination list. As Assistant Town Manager Andrews has reported, there remains lots of questions on the vaccinations. How many doses is the county getting, who that is going out to? But the housing concern, the educational concerns, and some schools not even open at the elementary level is a constant conversation piece. And so that is the next letter that the 15 mayors are currently working on. And so as soon as that is signed, I will make sure that Town Manager Pravetti shares that with all of you as well. Okay. And Town Manager Pravetti, do you have items of concern to please share with us and the community?
Thank you and good evening, everyone. Yes, I've got 4 items for you this evening. First of all, we are wrapping up the Finance Commission recruitment. We have 1 position available and applications are due on Friday, the 19th of February by 4 o'clock. We've also started the Youth Commission recruitment. Applications for that commission are due on April 30th by 4 p.m. We are continuing our partnership with the county, and so we are offering free COVID testing on Friday, February 19th. Appointments are strongly recommended, so that way we can make sure you have a reserved spot. And then just an announcement that we are doing a joint Planning Commission Town Council study session next Tuesday on the 23rd to discuss our parklet program, streetscape design, as well as to hear from a panel of experts regarding some emerging trends on retail and what the town can do to really harness those trends. Thank you.
Thank you. And so now I look to my council colleagues for our consent agenda. We have 11 items that have been placed there by staff that are issues that we think are administrative in nature. And hopefully, if there's anyone that would like to pull an item from consent, raise your hand. Vice Mayor?
I would like to comment, but not poll on number 9 when you're ready for comment.
Okay, thank you. And so I look to my attendees if there is anyone that would like to pull anything from my consent item. I see 2 hands raised. And so I'm not sure if Ms. Neese, if you can ask if those are to pull items from consent or if those are just early speakers who would like to speak under verbal communications.
So I'm not sure. I know Kate has had her hand up since pretty much the start of the meeting. The other one has just recently raised their hand.
Okay, if we could just pull them over real quick to ask the question.
Okay, I'll start with Kate.
Okay, and so Kate, are you pulling an item from our consent agenda?
Yes. Hi, Mayor Seiko. I'm not. We are here to talk about an item later, so you can call on us when we're at that point.
Okay, do you know if McNally X as well?
Yes, I believe it's regarding the same issue of opening the schools.
Okay, so so we'll put you back and we'll call you back when that's the right time. And at this time, I'm not seeing anyone else. Well, I see I see a Lindley Hogan, and so
I believe that one is for verbal communication.
okay, sounds good. Okay, so I am not going to pull anything from consent. Vice Mayor Rennie, I know you wanted to make a comment on item number 9.
Just a short comment. I want to commend staff for replacing the aerial lift body truck with a gas truck instead of a diesel truck. It's only been the last 10 years that it's become really obvious that PM 2.5 particles cause significant health problems, and getting rid of diesel as quickly as we can is really important. So I just wanted to call out that for everybody that's a really good thing that we're getting rid of a diesel truck, and it's going to gas, hopefully in the future electric, but it's first good step is to get rid of diesel. Thank you.
Okay. Council members, anyone who would like to make a motion for approval for all items on consent 1 through 11? Councilmember Risto?
Yes, I move to approve the items on consent through item 11, with the understanding that number 10, which regards Wood Road, is only asking for a continuation. And, I'm recused from any discussion on that, but obviously I'm fine with them getting an extension. So.
Thank you. And a second. So, Councilmember Badami?
So moved.
Okay. Vice Mayor Rennie, a vote on the motion.
Yes.
Councilmember Hudis?
Aye.
Councilmember Risto?
Aye.
Councilmember Badami?
Aye.
And I also vote yes on the consent item and the motion for approval. Thank you very much. And now we will move to our verbal communications. As mentioned earlier, this is an opportunity for members of our public to address the council on any matters that are not listed on our agenda tonight, which is specifically on our finance issues. To ensure all agenda items are heard, we are going to limit comments to 3 minutes per person with a maximum of 30 minutes, but only during this part. If we go over 30 minutes, then we'll reserve time at the end of the meeting. And again, this really is an opportunity to listen and not to engage. And so if there are any questions that council members have, if we can direct those questions towards staff after we close verbal communications, and if necessary, those items can be agendized at a future time. And so I will just call attendees one at a time as they appear on my list. Kate, Kate, you're gonna have to correct me. Is it Jude or Good?
It's good, like dude with a G.
Okay, welcome.
Yes, thank you. Thanks for listening. So I'll be as brief as I can. I am a Los Gatos resident. I'm a mother of 4 children in public school, elementary, middle, and high school. I'm seeing firsthand the effects of remote learning for almost a year. I'm mostly concerned about my oldest kids and the social emotional effect of this remote learning. A group of us, many parents, most of the families I know, some are teachers, they're parents, we've known each other from kinder on. Everybody's concerned and wants to get the children back to school. I come from a medical background. My father's a physician, and my brother's a nurse working in the front lines. My sister's a teacher, my mother's a teacher. And I've been following all the science, and the science indicates that it is safe now to go back. I've noticed that the average testing rate for COVID was certainly higher. And now I believe as of today, it was 10.9, which is close to the 7 per 100,000 rate that somebody came up with. But every infectious disease specialist that I've read, colleagues of my father's from Harvard and Yale, all say that the science indicates that actually the school place is safer than the community. And in schools that have been open since the fall, and all the data tracking indicates such. The schools need to be pushed. The superintendent and some of the board president and board members seem to have no sense of urgency. We've been writing and talking with them since early January and before. And we all want our kids back to school. We've said we'll volunteer if they need help. The technology needs to be ready in the classroom, and they need to be transparent with what Plan 3B means. 3A is a joke. 1 hour per week is not going to do it. Again, social emotional, suicidal ideation, children with anxiety and depression, learning gaps, it needs to happen now. And these kids don't have a voice. They don't have a union, and we all need to step up and advocate for them. Thank you so much for your time. I say this on behalf of my 2 9-year-olds, my 13-year-old, and my 14-year-old. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Good. McNally X.
Hello.
Hello, welcome.
Thank you. My name's Nicole, and I have 3 children. They're in 7th grade, 8th grade, and a junior in high school. And I would just like to mention that all of them would very much like to be back on campus with their friends. And, I'm hoping to do whatever I can to support them in that journey. And I would just like to remind everyone we're coming up on the 1-year anniversary of the schools closing. And I really think, a year ago, I don't think any of us would have ever imagined the schools would be closed for a year. And yet here we are, because when it was initially announced, it was supposed to be a time period of about a couple of weeks, enough to let the hospitals prepare to get ready for this pandemic and flatten the curve. And now I think it's turned into something much more. And we're trying to understand, where does this all end? What is considered enough to get everybody comfortable and back? And some of the initial discussions I think that we've had is that there are actually quite a few teachers that miss being in the classroom with their students. And so there's quite a coalition actually forming of students, parents, and teachers that all want the same thing. And yet, what we're seeing really is a roadblock with some combination of the superintendent and the unions. And we're really hoping that the town could be, more supportive of all these members that do want to be back on campus. And what I mean specifically by that is talking with the teachers to see what would make them comfortable. I know some of them have said they would like a little more IT training to get comfortable with teaching in an environment where they're teaching in person and over Zoom simultaneously. And this has been done in elementary school and through 6th grade. And I think there's no reason why this kind of training can't be expanded, and I'd like your support with that. They'd also like, let's say meetings and question and answer sessions with infectious disease experts. One of the parent fathers has graciously offered to do that, but again, it would be wonderful to see more support from the town, the leadership of the town, and making these events happen and available for the teachers so that we can all get, more communication going and more comfortable with being back on campus as an option in addition to the remote and learning environment. Thank you.
Thank you, McNally. Next speaker is Bob Lip.
Okay, hello?
Welcome.
Yeah, a little lighter subject, but still I think an important subject. A few years ago, the town council passed some laws on recyclable bags and stuff at the stores and things like that. And lately Safeway decided to just basically rub our noses in their anti-environmentalism. And so instead of providing paper bags, they only provide big heavy duty plastic bags, and they call them multi-recyclable and et cetera, but they're probably 10 times the plastic in each bag. So what they've done is increase the plastic usage with what I say is one-use plastic bags, and they don't offer paper. And paper is so much recyclable and wonderful compared to plastic. These plastic bags, Yeah, you can reuse them again, but then you get the microplastics in your environment, and you know they're not really recyclable. They call them recyclable and then they throw them in the dump. But paper is good. It's partially recyclable. The source from partially recyclable. The trees that it grow from are on farms, so they're pulling carbon out of our atmosphere. And the bags that don't get recyclable, they get thrown on our dump and then they sequester carbon. So paper bags are wonderful. Plastic is pretty awful. But yet here we are subsidizing Safeway by giving them 10 cents for every obnoxious plastic bag they send our way. And we have no choice. If we don't want to bring our own, we're stuck with these plastic bags. So I would like the council to revisit that law and possibly think about making it such that if somebody offers a quote unquote recyclable plastic bag, they have to offer their customer the option of a paper bag. Very, very simple.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Lip.
All right, thank you.
Suzanne Nestor.
Yes, hi. Can you hear me?
Yes, welcome.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I'm calling in to speak also on the issue of the school reopening. And I would like to echo everything that Ms. Good and Nicole said a few moments ago about the importance of our town stepping in to voice support and to help push our district to do what's right for the students and to help act on behalf of the students who really don't have a voice in all of these discussions and negotiations about what education they're getting in this past year. It's heartbreaking to see the damage that's being done to our students on a daily basis, the lack of social and emotional development that they're getting at the most critical time in their lives. And it's being hamstrung by fears and lack of understanding of science rather than listening to the true experts. And I think as Kate said earlier, Ms. Good said earlier, that the most important thing is to be looking at the science and understanding that we as a community have an obligation and a commitment and a responsibility to our kids to look after them, to do what's right for them, and to push for that. And I'd really like to see the town council stepping in to do more. I appreciate hearing that you're participating in a letter to the county on the vaccination issue, but I think it needs to go much farther than that. I think you as Mayor Mariko, as well as the town council, need to be pushing the county more to release some of the restrictions that the districts are using as reasons, if you will, to not open more and to open faster in the schools. And there's just no science behind that. And so that's my ask of you, is to step in as our mayor to do really what's right and to help push that forward, because we as individual citizens can't get on Sarah Cody's calendar or, you know, even Miss Dewin at the county superintendent's office, but you can, and you can be that voice. And that's what we would ask of you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Wayne Heimsoth. Mr. Heimsoth? And I'm not getting a response. And so Shelley, hello, Wayne? So Mr. Heimsoth, I'm going to ask you to try it again. And I don't know if you need to relog on, but meanwhile, while you do that, if we can have Silvana Casale speak.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, you're kind of faint, but we can hear you. Welcome.
A bit closer, thank you. I am a pediatric psychologist. I've lived here. I have 3 children, and my youngest is at the high school.
And Ms. Casale, if you're still really faint.
Okay, is that a little better?
That is, thank you.
Okay. Yes, my youngest is at the high school, and I am calling to also voice my concern about the schools remaining closed. My son is definitely not thriving in Zoom school, as we call it. We would love to see the schools open as soon as possible. The rest of the nation has opened in some format. All of the states are doing. My nieces and nephews in Florida are in school. The ones in Massachusetts are in school. And my son said to me the other day, you know, Mom, what's so sad is that I'm in the strictest state, in the strictest county, in the strictest school, and I'm getting nothing in person. And we're very upset. The parents are very upset. So we really would love for your help as our mayor to speak to, as Suzanne said, our health director, Sarah Cody, her director, Jeff Smith. I've been writing to them for many, many months, and they have never written back to meet with us. So they are shutting us down, but we feel like they're not listening. I've asked Michael Grove for an in-person meeting with distancing in front of the library with masks. He has never, ever granted me that. So the parents would like to meet with them. And other school districts, they're doing this in the gym. They're spaced out. They have their school board meetings in person in a safe environment. And we don't have any of that. So we just do emails. Even the board meeting, we tried to speak last week and we got shut down. So we really need our town council to speak for us as well and for our children, because our children, as Nicole said, they do not have a union and they're drowning. They're really suffering. The suicidal ideation is through the roof. The teenage suicides are very, very, very high. And it's this is disastrous. And our county is not paying attention to the most vulnerable population. So we really need your help. And if we could come meet with you in person at the library, we'd love to, and meet our coalition, our parents, help us brainstorm. We welcome that. So please write me back. I would love to hear from you. Thank you all for listening. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And Mr. Wayne Heimsoff, let's try it again.
Is my mic working this time?
It is. Welcome.
Sorry about that. My computer gave me problems earlier and my wife's behind me in a Zoom meeting. I'm Wayne Heimsoth. I'm an officer with the American Legion Post 99. Also a board member with the Los Gatos Veterans Memorial and Support Foundation. Going back years, we lost the ownership of our building in Campbell to the Santa Clara County and for the Santa Clara Library, who wanted it back in 2018. So they got it back. We had to move out, and we've been without a home now for that long. We've been meeting on Zoom, not at all, at different posts. And back 2 Novembers ago, November 3rd to be exact, we wrote a letter to the town council, Los Gatos, asking to use the old building called the Venue behind the Los Gatos High School. The building's been empty for 3 years. Arndt Andrews was nice enough to give some of us a tour of it. It's been empty. I attended the school board meeting the other day. As I understand it, the town council, Los Gatos, was waiting for some feedback to see if the high school wanted that building. When I talked to them, they said, no, the town owns it, and they didn't seem to be aware of any pending request to find out how they want to use it. So I beg you, I ask you to kind of take a look at that building because the American Legion Post 99 would love to use it for its headquarters. The Veterans Memorial and Support Foundation would like to use it because they're going to lose the building they are now on Main Street at some point. And also the Campbell Veterans Memorial are interested in using it too. So just asking that you give that a good look, and we sure like to hear back on our request that we put in. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next speaker, Jeff Suzuki.
Good evening, everyone. Before I start, I'd like to say that I'm speaking as an individual, not as a planning commissioner. In the past few council meetings, I've brought up the need to follow through on the consensus our town had from last year's community conversation on police. We've gotten a couple of responses from the town manager that we are currently working with the county to move toward mental health services, and police are trained in mental health situations, so on and so forth. For the first point, we are working with the county to move toward mental health, we're working with the county to collaborate on mental health services. I don't actually know what this means. Is Los Gatos receiving more mental health resources than before? We were already working with the county before, and from the information I've gathered, they've only historically intervened in the past when victims explicitly requested help. And there have been some horror stories that have happened in Los Gatos, including a case where a woman threatened to commit suicide, but the county refused to send help because she didn't ask for it. I simply don't know what this means, and I'd like more information on what precisely has changed between the dynamic of the Los Gatos Police Department and the county. I've already submitted a request for public records on the times that we have called upon the county for aid. Secondly, the idea that police are trained in mental health situations, we are not denying this. We are simply asking for the town to have a more comprehensive view on public safety. The police are just one aspect of public safety. This is not to discredit the police. Social workers, having devoted the bulk of their professional life specifically to issues of mental health, would likely be far more effective and efficient at their jobs. And the fact that the police chief himself suggests that we should defund him if we take mental health and homeless off his plate during that community conversation suggests that the police indeed do need help. They need additional help in this area, especially by specialists. And another aspect of public safety is ensuring that people of color feel like they belong and feel safe in this community. We've been told that we should work within the existing committees and that, and so on and so forth. I'm not very convinced by this argument, frankly. The purpose of those existing committees right now is to focus on their day-to-day operations specifically. I believe that we need a body of people specifically dedicated to ensuring that people of color in this community feel safe and protected and included, which is the reason why I think that the DEI committee is pretty much a necessity at this point. And of course, we'll need staff in order to ensure that this committee is working well. But in terms of our police department, it's already overbloated. In the 2015 police report itself, it says that we basically need to reduce the hours anyways. So I suggest that we delegate the resources where needed. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, Amy.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for your time. One thing I heard earlier, Mariko, you mentioned there was a county-wide social justice committee that needed one more person to volunteer to sit on it. So I very strongly ask or encourage that somebody on the Los Gatos Town Council who's interested in social justice and is, you know, at least supportive in principle of the DEI committee that we have been asking for, seriously consider donating more of their time to sit on said committee. I think having somebody from Los Gatos on that committee would really show that Los Gatos is committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And then obviously once we actually have our DEI committee here in town, which I'm sure will happen after time working on the idea will happen, then that would be the ideal person from council to sit on that committee and provide guidance to the committee from the county point of view and share all that information with that particular committee. And I just would like to reiterate that I really think we need a separate committee to be accountable and responsible for all things related to equity here in Los Gatos. In addition to all the other pre-existing committees, of course, looking at things with a diversity equity lens. So I just wanted to reiterate that. And I know that everybody's considering it and it hopefully will be discussed in the policy committee. but I just feel that I need to reiterate it here because I haven't seen a policy committee meeting come up on the agenda yet. So it looks like this is the right place for now. And thank you all so much for your time.
Thank you. Okay, I have no other hands raised for verbal communications. And so I will give that a couple of seconds. And Lindley Hogan.
I'm here. Hello. Can you hear me okay?
We can. Welcome.
Well, hello. There are 4 of us total. I hope we'll be able to reset the clock at the end of my talk for the next 3, because we had to all get together to make this happen. So I wanted to first say thank you for allowing us to express our concerns tonight regarding the new signage in town, threatening a fine of up to $1,000 if someone is not wearing a mask. I've had the privilege of meeting hundreds of people in town who think like me, and I believe I represent them here tonight. I am sure there are thousands of others who think like me who I have yet to meet. We are also concerned about the endless restrictions on our businesses and the closing of our schools. There are 4 of us here tonight using the same laptop to Zoom. Each of us will read something pertaining to our rights as Americans. We hope that we will have enough time to read everything we feel is important. The information presented tonight by us can be found on thehealthyamerican.org. These documents were emailed to the clerk earlier. I wonder which of you know the Constitution and why are you not educating the others on it? For you must know that you have already violated your official oath you made upon entering your office. The signs are unconstitutional, and so is the lockdown, which happens to be a prison term. The town needs to be educated on their rights. The town council must not violate their oaths. The town council must not violate other people's rights. You must take down the signs and allow people to do business as is their right to do so, and students to return to school. You must take action tomorrow. Shutdowns are illegal. This is a document from thehealthyamerican.org. There's no lawful authority for any governor, mayor, or health officer to order you to close your business due to COVID. There's no evidence of any emergency. Therefore, any emergency orders are null, void, and unlawful and may be successfully challenged in court and already have been. No governor or health officer has the authority to shut down your business without due process of law. That means no sheriff or health officer can close your business or revoke your license without a hearing. No emergency or pandemic suspends the law or the Constitution. You cannot lose your liquor license unless you serve alcohol to minors or are convicted of a crime. You cannot lose your license for not wearing or requiring masks or distancing. There is no law or regulation requiring you or prohibiting you from serving your patrons indoors or outdoors. You do not have to limit the number of patrons you serve. There is no lawful order that requires you or your employees to wear masks, distance, or limit the number of patrons you serve. No emergency orders supersede your rights. You have the legal right to operate your business the way you want to. No government agent has the authority to interfere in the legal operations of your business. Your business is your property, and the government ordering you to close or limit your operation is theft and deprivation of rights, which is a felony. Title 18-242. You are not licensed to suspend medical advice.
Your time is up. Thank you very much.
Raise your hand again.
Okay. And our next speaker. Okay, we have, Ms. Hogan, you've spoken already. So
No. There's 4 of us here on one computer. So I'm a new person. My name is Cindy Sheehan, and I would like to read for 3 minutes.
Okay, set the timer, please, for 3 minutes. And then I do want to give a warning that our 30 minutes is up and remaining verbal communications will happen at the end of the meeting.
Okay.
But go ahead and speak, Ms. Sheehan.
Thank you. I'm reading this on behalf of businesses in Los Gatos. Your private business serves the public and therefore must abide by all state and federal laws. No business policy supersedes the law. The governor's order, health orders, emergency, or pandemic supersedes our constitutionally protected rights. This business is open to the public, and I am the public. Your denial of my service violates several federal laws. You may not exclude me from the same and equal services as others. Denying my service or requiring me to be served outside or be limited to home delivery is violation of Title 237 of the U.S. Civil Rights Act of 1964. Title 3, and then some sections state that I shall not be denied the same participation and equal access as everyone else. The law prohibits you from serving me separately or differently. As such, this business is prohibited from unlawful discrimination by denying the entry of any member of the public who is and who is not disturbing the peace. To do so is a crime of false imprisonment, and you will be held personally liable for this crime. These premises are open to the public, and thus any charge of trespass is a false accusation, as I'm complying with all lawful conditions allowing me to remain on these premises. Also, on a side note on myself, and we have two other readers. I'm Cindy Sheehan. You guys have heard about me in the recent past. I feel that your actions of this town, including the mask mandates and the division that you guys have created, has destroyed this town. I have been here for so long as a parent volunteer in all the schools. I have been respected. I have thank you letters from teachers, from staff, from parents, and all of a sudden, I'm a domestic terrorist. I am so upset with what you guys have created in this town, and I'm not going to be silent, and I'm going to keep calling all of you out. Mark my words. Anyway, have a good night. We have two more readers.
Okay, said she was gonna wait.
Okay, and as I mentioned earlier in the meeting, we have verbal communications for the first 30 minutes, and then those who would like to speak with us for remaining verbal communications, we'll set aside that time at the end of the meeting, but 30 minutes has been decided, as has been stated publicly in all our records, to continue with town business. So I will close verbal communications at this time. Real quick, before we move to the remaining other business that's on our agenda, working backwards, I do want to clarify that the social justice under Cities Association, we do have representation on that. As president of Cities Association, I'm also on that. But again, I'm looking for volunteers for remaining council members that may be interested in those other committees. Colleagues, as well as public members, we are going to have an upcoming meeting on options for addressing mental health. There are many ways to incorporate mental health in our police departments, and I'm currently working with our town manager in bringing in the county so that those questions can be answered directly. If I can ask Town Manager Pravetti to look into the plastic bags issue that was raised. And finally, for those that have spoken with regard to schools, what would be most helpful is if there is very specific information that the county restrictions are that are preventing our schools from being opened. It would be helpful if you guys can email that to us directly. As you mentioned, we are having, all of us have opportunities to have conversations with the county supervisor, Dr. Dewan, as well as the county health officer. And so it would be helpful to know what restrictions exactly are preventing our schools from opening. And I asked Town Manager Pravetti to add the issues that have been raised to our ongoing regular meetings with the Superintendent Grove and Superintendent Johnson so that we can help advocate for our residents in a productive manner. So with that, I close verbal communications and I now look to town staff for other business. Item number 12, which is our mid-year budget performance report.
And Mr. Conway will be giving this report. Go ahead, Director Conway.
Good evening, everyone. I'm very excited my video is working. So good evening, Madam Mayor and town council members. My name is Steve Conway. I'm the Director of Finance for the town. Tonight, staff is pleased to provide to you the town's mid-year budget report for the first 6 months of fiscal year 2021, ending December 31st, 2020. This report is one of a number of periodic updates staff presents regarding the town's current year revenue and expense trends. The mid-year report's focus is primarily on the town's general fund, as it is the fund that hosts the majority of the town's operating revenues and operating expenditures. For the current fiscal year ending June 30, 2020, staff has completed its departmental reviews of estimated revenues and expense activity for all the departments, and we have now extrapolated those anticipated financial results through the end of the fiscal year. Staff has provided, as part of this report, detailed departmental expenditure and revenue analysis for the current fiscal year. And we've also included historical actuals for comparability and trend purposes that you may find useful. This analysis has led staff to recommend certain revenue reductions to some of the town's primary revenue sources. These reductions for the year are potentially offset by anticipated expenditure budget savings, which lead us to a net deficit for the fiscal year projected of $1.2 million. And that is as reported on the summary of revenues and expenditures. The $1.2 million net deficit can be found on the bottom line of the summary, which is located on page 31 of the mid-year budget report, attachment 1 that you have been provided for tonight's meeting. Staff is requesting tonight that as part of this report, council take 2 separate actions. The first is to approve the mid-year budget adjustments as we've listed and explained on pages 24 through 29 of this report. And staff is also recommending, number 2, that the town council make a motion providing staff direction on its preferences for addressing the estimated $1.2 million projected deficit currently anticipated for this fiscal year. The options available to close this gap include the use of general fund reserves, the Winchester land sale proceeds, or the temporary suspension of OPEB pre-funding that we do annually. These are among others that were discussed on pages 3 through 5 of this mid-year budget report. So one or more of these options would address the current year's projected deficit while preserving the continuity of service delivery through the end of the fiscal year. These options were recently presented to the town's new Finance Commission. And there was a general consensus amongst the commission members that the priority order of these measures should be, number 1, the use of the Winchester property sale proceeds, number 2 being the temporary suspension of OPEB pre-funding, followed by the possible temporary use of balances available in the town's OPEB IRS Section 115 trust. I believe our current balance in that trust is around $24.4 million as of the end of December, or even I think as of recently as February. So thank you, Madam Mayor and Council. The town's entire staff team who has worked on this report are with us tonight, including myself, our finance and budget manager, Gita Ngvari, and the town's assistant town manager, Arn Andrews. So we are all here this evening. We are available for your questions, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Director Conway, and thank you. It's good to see your face and having the computer issues fixed.
Yes, I got it.
I see Vice Mayor's hand up, and then Councilmember Hudis will open up for questions now. Vice Mayor?
Okay, if I could start on page 195 of our iPad, page 31 of the report. You've given us an income and expenses statement there, and I want to completely understand. So what you've given us is a balanced budget. When I come down to kind of the total operating matches up with the total revenues, and it looks like you've added the line proceed from sales 1.2 million. Into the revenues, causing it to balance more or less, close to balance. And then you added allocate to surplus property reserve below that of 1.2, and then you came up with the bottom line is a negative. So I just want to understand sort of the mechanics of kind of this double entry.
Thank you, Council Member. We did that very intentionally. We wanted to show that we wanted to include it as a revenue. It is indeed a fiscal year revenue for the fiscal year 2021. As you may recall, the sale did not close until July of 2020. So we ended up booking this entire revenue as a fiscal year 2021 revenue. It was not identified as an item that we could use, I believe, or it was identified as a potential item in the adopted budget. And we broke it out to give it visibility, to include it in the revenue, but also say included in part of to make this this balance that we end up as a result for the projection for the year does include that Winchester land revenue.
But then at the bottom, it shows a deficiency of 1.2, but that's not really deficient if we use that revenue, right? It's a little confusing the way this is written.
We did that to try to show that would be, if we were not using that revenue, there would be more of a problem, correct? So it was just, it was a difficult financial statement to try to show that, to include it, yet also back it out. It just provides more information.
So just to be clear, so the way we read this is we're balanced within $32,000 if we go ahead and use the proceeds of the sale as a revenue that fills the budget hole.
That is correct. And part of what's happening here is we have to do the revenue recognition because the property sale did close in July. But then council had only said, let's put these monies aside and not allocate them. And so heading into tonight, that shows where these monies will move to the surplus property reserve unless tonight's discussion gives staff different direction. And so there's kind of two things. There's the revenue recognition and abiding by the current council mandate, which was to just unallocate these funds and hold them in abeyance until we see what's happening from a COVID-19 perspective. And then there's tonight's conversation, which says, this is what we think to date is the impacts on our budget from COVID-19. And do you want to go ahead and use these monies from the property reserve? So to your point, that is correct. If we get guidance tonight to go ahead and take those surplus funds and allocate it to the current projected deficit, those numbers will net out and you'll be looking at basically an even budget heading into year end currently.
Okay. I think I get that. So basically we'll make a motion to remove that second to last line of there, and then we won't have the big negative number. It'll be a small negative number.
If council decides to, yes, you would say don't allocate it to the reserve, use it to cure the deficit.
Okay. Second question on what page is this? 26 of the report, page 190 of our iPad. The first one, use of pension OPEB reserve. You're adding 300,000. So when we get at the end of the year, assuming we don't do any more additions to CalPERS or anything, how much money will be in this pension OPEB reserve? It's not being used to fill any budget holes is really the question, right?
So
thanks, Gita.
This is Gita Ungvari, Finance and Budget Manager. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for the question. So the $300,000 and that use of reserve request, it's just a budgetary and accounting doing, because closing last fiscal year 1920, we placed an additional $300,000 from surplus to the OPEB pension reserve, and we did not allocate in the budget during the budget time because we were not aware of it. So this is just the usage of the pension reserve based on our general fund reserve policy. If the council decide not to use this reserve, paying ADP, it's can be directed differently.
So two questions still related to this. How much money is going to be in our OPEB reserve at the end of the year?
And Gita, before we answer, let's differentiate because there's two things. There's the accounting reserve that we keep internally as these general fund policies are implemented, similar to the 300,000 we're talking about. And then there's monies that have already been transferred to the IRS 115 trust. And so monies currently residing in the 115 trust, Gita and Steve, I think are somewhere in the vicinity of about 900,000.
It would be on our investment report that we just had tonight. I'm trying to remember, but it's I think it's close to that.
Right, and so to your point, council member, per the current policy, when we have a surplus, we're supposed to put an additional 300. We don't know if we have a surplus at the beginning of the year. We have to wait until the CAFR closes in the December, January timeframe. With that closure, when the CAFR was accepted, it said, okay, here's another 300,000. Currently, that money would be fungible in the sense that it resides in our internal accounting account, as opposed to it's been passed to the 115 trust already. So those monies, even though from a general fund policy perspective, they've been earmarked to move in that direction, they're still fungible in the sense that if council wanted to deem that they wanted to not pass it to the 115 trust, you would have the ability to do that also.
So based on all of this, we still have almost $1 million in the trust we can move to CalPERS if we want to. That's not going to get used up by any of this budget plan.
Correct. And that conversation, depending on the new chair of the Finance Commission, we're hoping to have a big discussion about pensions at the March meeting, pending confirmation from the new chair.
So the 300,000 we're talking about moving from our OPEB reserve to the 115 trust, does it show up anywhere in this income statement on page 195-31 of the report?
Yes, this would show up as a use of the reserve. Originally, we budgeted 4.2 million use of the OPEB pension reserve, and we would change it to 4.5 million, just to show that change.
And I believe there was a budget adjustment, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that is one of our proposed budget adjustments for this mid-year. That will take the 4,232,000 budget to 4,005,000 for once council approves that budget adjustment.
Okay, I see that. That's the last two columns.
Yes.
And it's the line, 2 lines before you total of other sources there, basically.
That's correct.
Okay. Mayor, I think I have one more question. So there we have a coronavirus relief fund item in the middle of page 190, 26 of the report of 388 and change. Is that money we've already gotten, or are we planning something from the current Biden bill where we know there's more state and local funds proposed but not yet passed?
That was the first wave of initial CARES Act funding. And in order to be eligible to receive the funding, we had to provide paired up invoices that were compliant with the CARES Act. And so those funds were received based on expenses we had already incurred related to COVID mitigation measures.
So then with the passage of that bill, assuming it passes, which they have the ability to do, we would get more money this year then?
Potentially, depending on the nature of the bill. I mean, theoretically, the bill is going to contemplate additional funding to local governments, but until we see it, right now, the only outstanding would be eventually we will do some limited reimbursements with FEMA, but the FEMA compliance was much stricter than the CARES Act. And so it'll be a much lower dollar amount. And due to the nature of FEMA, it'll be much further out in time that we receive a reimbursement.
Okay, I think that's all my questions for now. I'll let some others have it.
Okay, thank you, Vice Mayor. And I saw Councilmember Hudis raised your hand.
Yes, thank you. And the report here has been very helpful to understand our financial position relative to the budget for this item and for the forecast for the next item. And the work of the Finance Commission has helped as well to give us some options and some thoughts from some of our financial experts who live here in town. I wanted to ask a couple of questions about the revenue side. So I had a few questions about that. And so going to the pie chart on, let's see, what page is that? Page 170 of the staff report. This is helpful. I do think we need to really focus on the economically sensitive variable income that we get from tax, and that it would be the property tax and VLF, the sales and use tax, and the TOT. Those are really the key performance indicators that help us understand how the economy is affecting the town. And so I am struck by the fact that the percentages on this pie chart are very different from the ones that we see later on. So for instance, property tax VLF is 42% here. And in the later report, I believe it's 28%. So is that because we're looking only at the general fund here? And what's the rationale for only looking at the general fund when we're looking at the budget?
Thank you for the question, council member, and staff does apologize for the confusion. Generally in the mid-year, we tend to focus on the general fund because, as Director Conway mentioned in his opening remarks, the general fund is where we receive most of our revenues, and it's also where we fund most of our activities. When we transition to the next document, the 5-year, we tend to talk about all revenues. And so, for instance, here, property tax and sales tax, to your point, equals with TOT somewhere around 62% of revenues, whereas when you read the 5-year report, it sounds as if we're only talking about 40% of revenues. And so that is exactly the difference. Here we're talking about general fund, a smaller dollar amount, and so bigger pie slices. When we move to the 5-year forecast, we talk about all revenues, bigger pie, so smaller slices. Thank you for pointing that out. And in the future, when we bring these items, we'll try to make them sync up a lot easier for the reader.
Great. And I do think it's not that hard for us as non-finance professionals, council members, to just sort of grasp on these key performance indicators of the tax that's coming in, that's variable and sensitive to the economy. So looking at that and the percentage change and what's happening in the shift between those three major revenue sources is really going to be helpful. So thanks for that. I had another question on revenues, and I'm looking at the revenues from business licenses. And I noticed that even prior to the pandemic, they've been on a downward trend. And so let's see, what page am I on here? Looks like
page 10 of our report.
Okay, great, thanks. And so question is, what's going on with business license fees, and why are we seeing a downward trend there? And the implication would be that as we go into the budget cycle, that maybe there's some things we could do to help with that.
Thank you, Councilmember Hudes. We have had some trends in recent years where we have lost some business license revenue. We had one of our major business license providers. We, for confidentiality reasons, can't give the exact amount, but Roku was one of our businesses located within the town limits. They have moved. They paid a substantial business license fee based on gross receipts. So we lost that business in our portfolio. That has been offset by, I think, some more increased revenue from Netflix, but not enough to prevent a slowing down of some of the business license tax revenue. In addition, I believe, I'll let our budget manager speak. She probably has a couple other.
Yes, I just want to add additional caveat that fiscal year 2016-17 included a true-up number from Netflix, a bigger number.
That's correct. That's correct.
It was a significantly higher number. And but in addition, what the finance director said, when bigger companies are leaving the town, it has a big effect on the business license.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
And if I may, I had one more question on revenues. On page 175, that's our TOT, the transient occupancy tax. The question is, and I know, we're doing a little bit of 2020 hindsight here, but when this was adopted in May, we were already into the pandemic. What was the thinking about planning for an increase in TOT during 2021 compared to the prior year? Why did we think it was going to go up at that point?
And thank you, council member. And it's a very fair question. We had already gone at mid-year last year with what was then appearing to be a fairly significant increase in TOT. At the conclusion of the year, similar to now, we actually, when we closed the budget in, I think it was May of last year, we actually then did a budget adjustment for 1920 down about 900,000 of sales tax. And so I know visually when you look, it appears as if, we were looking at what appeared to be an increase in sales tax, but it was basically a 15% decrease based on what was already a lowered number from the mid-year projection as opposed to the close of the year. Into the close of the year, we did bring it down about 900,000. And if you look at what we're recommending today, we basically took what was approaching a 3 million plus revenue stream and have taken it down almost 3/4. And so this is rightfully one of the areas staff got very wrong. For sales tax, we were off about 3%, property tax 3%. We envisioned a fairly quick, steep decline here, but then net at the end of the year, about down 15%. Based on some of the extenuating measures the county continues to do for hoteliers, we were just very off here.
Yeah, I would just add, I wouldn't say that it was really a staff issue. I think that this was something that is a joint decision between council and staff, and it's just surprising to see that we were projecting that higher. So thank you for the explanation on that. I did have other questions on expenditures, but I will hold on that.
Okay. I did see Councilmember Badami's hand up.
Thank you, Mayor. So as indicated in the mid-year staff report, there's the potential for additional adjustments before the end of the fiscal year. So can staff explain to me how and when do these come before the council?
So it's a great question. So this is kind of our first pass with 6 months worth of information where we think the remaining 6 months are going to go. With each additional month where we get actual data, it's just going to make our estimates that much more precise heading into the end of the year. And so once again, based on concurrence with the new chair for the Finance Commission, we would envision coming back to the Finance Commission probably in April, because with Measure A, they are supposed to get it about 20 days, I believe it is, prior to the council seeing it. And so if we have a conversation with the Finance Commission in April, that means we can continue to refine what our thinking is, bring that to council in May with the town manager's, first proposed operating budget, and then generally we conclude the process in June. And so there's going to be a couple iterations where staff's going to be able to refine their thinking, the Finance Commission will be able to provide additional thinking, and then the council will be able to provide additional feedback also.
Thank you.
Councilmember Risto.
Hi, thank you. I don't have a lot of questions because I asked most of them before the meeting, I think, but I don't know if this is for discussion tonight. I do not recall or don't know if the information's out there, but for Measure G, our sales tax, that was a general sales tax. And I know that we've accumulated money there. Have we decided how to spend that? Or if we make a decision, does that dictate what happens in future years? Or is that a decision that's made periodically?
So great question. And there's going to be a couple layers of answers to your question. The ballot measure went forward as a 50+1 general sales tax. That being said, the ballot language that was submitted had some very specific purposes identified. And the town attorney may want to jump in at some point. When you take what was in the ballot for the Measure G district tax, and then also look at that with the new Measure A language that talks about the sales tax measure and basically sunsetted the Sales Tax Oversight Committee and took the purview of that into the new Finance Commission. Our thought is that this probably needs to look like, feel like, and be more of capital intensive money as opposed to general sales tax, to stay within the spirit of the language, both in the Measure G ordinance and in the Measure A ballot measure. That being said, there was a pretty broad discussion at the Finance Commission regarding the sales tax. Everybody decided that they want to continue that conversation probably in the April timeframe. Councilmember Rennie had some thoughts about should it even be a dedicated source to the CIP. So that discussion is going to start again in April, and so you'll have additional opportunities to talk about it. And I'm not sure if the town attorney wants to add anything to my comments.
Okay, and I see a head shake. Any further questions, Councilmember Risto?
No, none. Thank you.
Okay, and then Councilmember Hudes, you said you had more questions?
Yeah, I had 3 or 4 questions about expenditures. And so the first one is about personnel and salary and benefits. And so I'm on, let's see, page 179, and there's a table in the middle that shows salaries and benefits. Unlike some of the other ones, it doesn't show the budget, but I was able to find that on page 229. But my question is, you know, in the text, it says that there are 5 open positions as of February 8th. How can salary expenditures be projected to be on budget, being 20.3 million against a budget of 20.2? And is it realistic that we have only 5 open positions when typically we've had 12 or more at this mid-year budget review?
Oh, thank you, Councilmember Hudes. The point of this table was to indicate that in this particular fiscal year, though we do have currently in consultation with HR, we do have approximately 5 FTEs of vacancies. This particular fiscal year, when departments in some of these key vacancies have occurred, have used temporary staff to fill in. So there were 2 things that affected this fiscal year's trends. One is the use of temporaries has been pretty immediate, right? As soon as the vacancy occurred, we incurred expenses to hire temporary staff to come in and keep the service level, keep the continuity in the service level. And the second thing that happened this fiscal year was that we had, excuse me, I'm having a brain lapse on this one, but there was this, Agita, please help me.
Let me just add that although we are getting very close or a little bit over the salary line items in the budget, but the benefits, we see some saving because the temporary people doesn't have the pension benefits. So we see some savings.
Yes, we have savings in the benefit area, but on the salaries, we do not have I do remember the second item I had. We changed our budgeting method. If you have council, I know we have some new council members, but we actually budgeted for our positions just one step above their current actual steps. So in this current fiscal year, we are for most of our employees at or near top step. There's less gap in the budget there. So by only having a 1 step increase in budget, we are going to always by using that method, we are by default always going to have a closer approximation where our actual salaries are going for the most part to equal budget, unless there is a vacancy occurring. And even if that vacancy occurs, if it's in a pretty critical position, we often are filling in with our temporary staff, as Gitta mentioned. So we're not anticipating seeing a big savings.
And once we transition later to the 5-year discussion, you'll be able to see with greater clarity the concept of salaries might be remaining the same, but we are starting to see savings on the benefits side. So that'll become clearer when we move to one of the attachments on the 5-year discussion.
Okay, I think it's relevant to this discussion as well. It does look like the largest savings that we have, and I very much appreciate that staff is looking for these savings and looking to manage the budget, but that largest item seems to be about 1.3 million in reduced benefits related to salary, and that seems to come from the areas that you've identified. So it's helpful to understand that as we start looking at other options to close the budget gap. But thanks for that. I had two other sort of policy type questions about the way the budget is being used, and let me know if it's not appropriate, but I wanted to ask about whether on page 183, we talk about a 2-year temporary position to assist the town with emergency preparedness and response operations. And this is very critical, and it's a strategic priority as well. Why would this be only a 2-year temporary position?
Thank you for the question. And in the last 4 to 5 years, we've actually been taking quite a few incremental steps to really enhance, at least from the town manager's perspective, our ability to have an effective emergency response. It started a few years back with budget requests, $50,000 to help enhance the CERT program, $50,000 to help enhance technology in the EOC. We then moved to what made sense then is let's see if we can provide some capacity to help with the actual organizational aspects of an active EOC, which includes a lot of documentation like the emergency operations plan and annexes. So given the budget at the time, we had the wherewithal to introduce a part-time position for a limit dated period. When you do a part-time positions, they're usually limit dated. We would recommend with the budget, the town manager is going to recommend extending that for another 2 years. One of the reasons limit dated positions help is because when you're first kind of piloting an idea, you actually start to see, if it makes sense, kind of proof of concept, do we have enough work for a full-time emergency manager, or is it something that can be handled on a part-time basis? The value add we got out of the position the last 2 years, I would say, was quite good. And so I believe the town manager will be recommending the continuation of that program.
Okay, thank you. I think it's really critically important. So we'll have a chance to look at that during the budget, the next round of the budget cycle. The next question I had was about police. And so I had really two questions from a policy perspective in the way we're using our budget. The first one comes back to some of the comments that Mr. Suzuki made earlier. And so my question is, there's a reduction in budget reduction, but does the budget for the police department reflect the implementation of the outcomes from the Judge Cordell community session recommendations, shifting some response to county social services, enhanced police complaint structural changes, and enhanced demographic reporting, and deploying community resource officers to address non-emergency calls? Are those things reflected in the current budget?
I'll take this one. Thank you, council member, for the question. So the reporting of the traffic stop data is required by law. So our town's already been working on updating our software and hardware so that we're going to be able to capture that information. We're hoping to bring you some initial data for your consideration, hopefully the second meeting in March. So that'll be our first quarterly police reform meeting with the council. So that was already built into the budget and investment that's already been made. Our collaboration with the county is something that is ongoing and does not cost us money. It's a resource that's available to our office. And again, we'll provide an update in terms of how many calls for service utilize those county resources and what some additional options might be, as the mayor described in her comments after verbal communications. Our resource officers, we have 2 interns in those positions. They are the police department is determining the extent to which they can answer non-emergency calls. As you know, sometimes non-emergency calls can turn into emergencies, so we want to be careful about the deployment of that. It's something we are continuing to explore. And as a referral last November, council did ask that we consider different options for how we can free up our officers from those non-emergency calls. So we'll be working with the chief on additional proposals for consideration during the proposed budget discussions in May. The external investigators, the independent investigators, those contracts are actually going to be in the town attorney's budget. So that is why there's some savings in the attorney's program, but we are not asking for budget adjustments, because once we find our new independent investigators, we may need to start tapping into some of those budgets. So essentially, we've got the resources we need for right now. As this evolves and as council asks us to do more, there may be future more adjustments that are going to be needed. But for right now, the budget does include the implementation of all the reforms.
Thank you. I had one more question about police, and that is, with the reduction in budget, is that going to impact the ability of police operations to deal with the increase in burglaries that we're seeing and other COVID-19 related community crimes? Will that hamper our ability to respond?
Let me ask the chief to join us to answer that particular question.
And while the chief is coming online, from a mid-year report perspective, when we identify what we refer to as expenditure savings, that's an amalgamation of quite a few things and is not indicative of necessarily lowering staffing. And the chief can finish out.
Welcome,
Chief. Thank you, Laurel. Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Councilmember Hughes, for the question. You are absolutely correct. Ourselves, our communities are getting hammered by burglaries, and of late we've had just an onslaught. So it is a countywide, it's actually, a California-wide, probably nationwide problem, and it has a lot to do with the politics of the justice system. We are working with our staff. We're pretty thin right now, so we're trying to respond as best we can. We do have some ideas that are utilizing technology as a force multiplier. So the council in fall authorized us to use the SLESIF, the State Law Enforcement Services Fund, a grant to use to assist frontline law enforcement. So one of the options we're looking at right now is to incorporate Flock. Well, it's one of the vendors, sort of a video ALPR system that we can kind of place at the main ingress and egress points in town. Right now, our officers, typical patrol time, will do premise checks of certain areas that we know are known for a lot of burglaries. They tried doing it the other night. Actually, last night, one of the corporals found a vehicle that was kind of skulking around one of the areas in town, but it's very hit or miss. I think if we were to have some kind of warning, because typically we're finding that these property crimes, whether it's residential burglaries, whether it's auto theft, or whether it's thefts from vehicles, they are typically either the vehicles are known. Typically, when the officers try to stop them, they flee, but oftentimes they get plates, or they're using stolen vehicles from other jurisdictions. So with the ALPR system, we would have some indication, someone coming off like Highway 17, southbound to westbound Highway 9, and our dispatch would get a notification, and then the dispatcher could direct officers to be in that area. It's not foolproof, but at least it gives us a little more direction on it. So we're looking at even if you were to say you're going to be 10 more officers, I don't know that I could solve the property crime. it would help. I'm not saying I don't want 10 more officers, but I think what we're trying to do is utilize our tools at hand and then tools that are available. The flock system is very effective in Milpitas. I believe the city of Santa Clara has gone to it, and they're just getting their vehicle thefts from vehicles just through the roof. So again, it's just utilizing stuff like that. And we're thinking, the officers are all thinking about different innovative ways that we can address the problem, but it is a big problem.
Thank you. It's really helpful. I get a lot of communications from residents on this who are concerned, and as we're looking at budget and we're asking the police department to see if they can reduce their estimated year-end budget, and we're also asking for some reforms through the Cordell session and report. Want to make sure that if there are things that are needed to deal with this this increase in crime, that we're not hampering the ability to deal with those things on the other side. So I appreciate you're giving us an update on that. Thank you.
And Council Member, if I could just add one thing, it's difficult now, but I think one of our great tools that we've had in place is the neighborhood watch programs. We have a bunch of neighborhood watches. It's really the best thing. Neighbors looking out for one another. People in the neighborhoods know when something is not right. And we get a lot of calls. I mean, our community members are very engaged, but I would, as you meet with the residents, I would encourage formation of these neighborhood watch groups and using our Los Gatos On Watch to register their videos, because as an investigative tool, the home video has been very, very helpful to us.
Great, thank you. Those are the questions I have on expenditures. I know we're eager to get to some guidance on options for closing the budget gap, so I'll just stop here.
Okay, council members, if there are no further questions, at least at this time, I'm going to see if anyone from our public would like to speak on this matter. Okay, and so for our attendees that are here, if you'd like to speak on the mid-year budget, please raise your hand. I see one, Lindley Hogan.
Hi, thank you. We have Jennifer here. She's going to speak.
Welcome, Jennifer.
Okay. Sorry, hi. Hi, I'm sorry. My name is Jennifer Wooten. And I just wanted to speak on behalf of the businesses that are creating a conflict in the community in regards to people that have disabilities especially. But I want to give them my money, and I want to shop and enjoy their goods for their goods and services.
Ms. Wooten, is this specific to the mid-year budget, or is this just more verbal communications?
Well, I'm sorry if you're in the wrong place.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I won't forget about you, and I'll let you know when it's the right time for verbal communications.
Thank you so much. Sorry about that.
No worries, no worries. Okay, so again, this is specific to the mid-year budget. I don't see anyone raising their hand, so I'm going to close the public testimony for this part, bring it back to council members, and if there's any further questions, any comments. But again, I'm looking for an action, a motion to authorize the budget adjustments as contained in the report and to identify where to close the gap. Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. So the Finance Commission, their discussion and recommendation, if I remember correctly, was to use the property surplus to balance the budget. And at that time, it was not enough to do that. And I think we were going to reduce the OPEB pre-funding for any additional. Right now, our budget gap is very close to the property surplus reserve with a little bit extra. So, I would be tempted to make a motion that said, we will reverse the property surplus reserve or take it out of property surplus reserve to balance it, and any additional needed would come from the OPEB pre-funding. I have a question though. If we get new, maybe it won't be called CARES Act, but CARES Act 2 let's say, funding during the year, and we don't need all of the money from the property reserve, what's going to happen? I could see staff would either put some back in the reserve, or maybe didn't take it all out, or we would end up with a budget surplus, which immediately says now we're supposed to go fund something and then put it in the CIP. What would happen if we end up with more money beyond this, based on the motion I was suggesting?
So in the May timeframe, when this comes back to council, if we start to have information that either shows a smaller surplus or a greater surplus, you will be able to weigh in again. And so to your point, tonight's decision is just guiding us for the next 6 months, knowing that we can use, if needed, the proceeds from the sale of the property. If it's not entirely needed, you will have that information prior to the year closing out. And so you'll be able to say, you know, we just wanted to go back to the property surplus reserve or some other allocation. Similar to the OPEB discussion, if as we start moving into the close of the year, if it looks like the deficit's going to be greater than what we're looking at tonight, 1.2 million, then we will come back and say we need additional funding. The Finance Commission had previously identified the OPEB pre-funding and these other items. In April, they might identify additional items, but we will continue to come back as we refine our estimates. And then based on whatever the surplus or deficit is at that time, we will bring options to help the council decide how they want to cure it.
So I will make them, go ahead, Director Conway.
I wanted to add one small piece for council's consideration. If you looked at page 31 of the budget report, you would see that the adopted budget did include, which was a conscious decision, approximately $900,000 of funding from the Capital and Special Projects Reserve for one-time use, one-time initiatives. So I'm anticipating that if we did receive some substantial second round of CARES Act, the need to pull from that reserve would not be necessary. We would actually have operating revenues that would fill that gap, and then we would still require the property sale, because they're both of those funding sources are in this budget.
And
so
which line are we referring to?
The use of reserves, capital and special projects. If you'll see, following the 4,532,000.
Yep. Okay, I see it. Thank you.
That was in the adopted budget. Now, if we get a second round of CARES, we may not need to use that, or we could choose to use that and not use the surplus land.
And for our new council members, last year's budget, to solve the budget, there were 3 primary strategies.
Yes.
One was the change in the methodology for calculating salaries, which both Director Conway and Gatos have spoken to. The other was we changed how we value 2 of the internal service funds, which created savings. And then the final recommendation is the one that's being spoken to now, which, as Director Conway pointed out, is a line item on page 31.
So let me try a motion out of this. I would say, I think what makes sense to me, we'll see if other council members like it. We fill the budget gap with the surplus property reserve. And if it turns out we don't need that full amount, we leave the extra in the surplus property reserve. If we need more than that amount, we start taking from the pre-funding of the OPEB. And that would be my motion.
And Vice Mayor, in your motion, do you also authorize the budget adjustments as contained in the mid-year budget report?
Yes.
Okay, and may I have a second? I see Councilmember Rista.
Yes, I'll second that motion. I really appreciate that the staff and the Finance Commission kind of laid out some options. And I think it's really ideal that we have the $1.2 million from the Winchester property sale. I think that is our best first step. And, you know, the additional payments to OPEB in the past were initiated when we had budget surpluses. And if we are not in that situation in May or later with so many unknowns about this pandemic, then we can make those decisions. But I will second the motion.
And are there any questions to the motion or comments? And I do have a quick question. I should know this, but when will we get notified if the CARES Act does pass, how much exactly comes to the town, and any guidance or restrictions and how that comes?
Thank you, Mayor. It really depends on how the legislation is written. With the first CARES Act, it was passed on to the state, and then the state made their distribution. So we don't know. There's talk about local government in various versions of the bill. So we don't know if that means to counties, and then it would be up to the county to communicate what might come to cities. There have been other COVID relief bills, as you know, where the big cities get money, but the little ones don't. So until we really see the legislation and there's some clarity, we just don't want to count on it until we actually know for certain. So hopefully by late spring, that bill will be enacted and there'll be enough guidance so that way we will have a better sense as to what would be our fair share of those funds, should they be available. Thank you.
Okay, and my last question to that, because I recall the National League of Cities was asking for local municipalities to get involved, because there is no clear guidance yet in how those funds will be allocated. That's correct, right?
That's our understanding as well.
Okay, so I appreciate that clarity. And again, I appreciate all the different scenarios that the mayor, the vice mayor has provided. So I will also be voting on the motion and look forward to that discussion, thinking optimistically of when that funding arrives. So, okay, Vice Mayor, we're voting on the motion now.
I think Councilmember Hudas had his hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry, Councilmember Hudas.
I just had a quick comment that I really want to thank town staff for the work that's gone into this, and the Finance Commission. There's enhanced scrutiny right now, and there's the need to collaborate with the Finance Commission. And in particular, I think the result has been enhanced reporting in the spirit of transparency. And secondly, a recognition by the town manager and town staff that we have a budget challenge, and that engaging with the departments to look at reasonable options, and to look at it department by department, I think is a very effective step, and I really appreciate that as a way to help make decisions for the town.
Thank you, and I echo that sentiment as well. Okay, I'm going to call the question. That voting on the motion, Vice Mayor Rennie?
Aye.
Councilmember Hudas?
Aye.
Councilmember Risto?
Aye.
Councilmember Badami?
Aye.
I also vote aye. It passes unanimously, and thank you again to our finance team and everyone that participated in this mid-year report. So, okay, let's move on to our 5-year forecast.
Thank you, Mayor and Town Council. So as you can see, the mid-year discussion is critical to what then becomes the 5-year forecast discussion, because as we start to hone in, as the finance team starts to think where we're going to close June 30th, that starts to become the basis and the foundation of trying to decide how 2021-22 is going to look, and then extrapolating beyond there. And so as you can see with the development of the mid-year, we continue to refine our revenue forecasts. In the case of TOT, that continues to deteriorate more than anticipated. Sales tax appears to be kind of in line, but with a lot of caution, as staff has stated throughout this whole process. There's still a lot of unknowns, but what staff tries to do and what we discussed with the Finance Commission is we try to come up with what we refer to as a base case. In most traditional years, like January last year, a base case meant we were looking at what was probably going to be a moderate growth economy similar to what we had been experiencing. A base case this year already takes a lot of the collective realignment we've done to revenues because of COVID, looks at the data again, whether it's with consultation with the county assessor's office, Muni Services, or speaking with our hoteliers. And then we try to create a base case. Within that base case, we then say, what if things are better than we thought? What if things are worse than we thought? So throughout the 5-year forecast, you'll see that discussion of if we thought we were going to have better growth, what would that look like in terms of a revenue stream? If we thought we were going to have lower growth, what would that look like in terms of a revenue stream? We then also take a look at our expenditure side. You know, where do we think we are given current salaries, current benefits, and what do we think is an appropriate growth factor going forward? You've already heard the finance director and Gatos speak a couple times about we really changed our methodology to make it, you know, much tighter from a budgetary perspective in terms of actual salaries one step. The finance director spends a lot of time in consultation with our actuaries as we think, okay, now that we know what our salary base is, what do we think we should project in terms of pension benefits? I will caution, there's still a lot of unknowns, but once again, as we move through this process heading into June, we will continue to refine. And then when we come with a proposed budget from the town manager for 21-22, we will continue to create new projections based on what that budget is. That being said, you can see from the forecast currently, we are anticipating a minor deficit in 21-22 also of approximately $2 million. I'm terrifying people. So $2 million in the base case. And then we start to see that mitigating in the forecast to a minor deficit, kind of flat, and then minor surpluses. So the good news is our base case, even though we still have some challenges, we're starting from a very low base. And it does show that, you know, with 21-22, working to cure that, we do start to see kind of a flat budget. If you think back to January of last year, we were showing surplus projections of $9 million plus. And so from a staff perspective, we still think a lot of what we're experiencing is going to be one-time in nature and is mainly attributable to the effects of COVID and what's happened from revenues due to mitigation measures. That being said, if we do start to see things that appear to be structural in nature, we will start looking, as Councilmember Hudas pointed out, with our departments. You know, do we have some areas we can look in terms of expenses, you know, that would not alter the service level, but perhaps there are things we can do to tighten up. If it then looks as if we could be in something a little more challenging, if COVID continues to move on or variants continue to mutate, and we are looking at something more challenging, then as the staff report says, we would come back to council to engage a much broader dialogue with the community if we are looking at something that would require a change to service levels. And so with that said, staff has presented what we think is a pretty reasonable base case. In discussions with the Finance Commission, 2 of the commissioners concurred that given all the unknowns, they believe most of the assumptions provided are reasonable. 2 of the other commissioners also said that while it seems reasonable on the surface, they are still very cautionary in terms of, you know, there's still a lot of unknowns. And so this is staff's base case presentation. There will continue to be refinements along the way, and you have all your directors here. You still have the finance team here and others to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Andrews. Councilmember Badami.
Thank you. One of the one-time strategies is to modify the CIP to free up funds for 2021 or 21-22. So what are staff's specific recommendations or options to implement this approach?
I'm going to ask Director Morley to join us and the town manager to join us.
Good evening. So it leads to a tough decision on a number of projects that are already in the works. But there are a few that we haven't started yet that we could take off the books and use those funds for sort of offsetting some of the cost, the potential expenditures that we foresee. There's a handful. For instance, we have with a project that we're implementing now, a guardrail project to replace guardrails. We have a match that we had originally budgeted into that. Most of the project is grant funded, so we won't need the match that we had programmed, and we'll be able to return that. That will be some help. There's some other projects that we haven't started, like a stormwater project that we can not move forward on. We had looked at speed tables on Main Street in front of the high school. We could not move forward with those. And then we discontinued the school bus program sort of right before the school year, and we still have a few dollars left in that that we'll be returning as well to the fund balance. So there's a number of projects like that that are fairly painless. Then after that, it becomes a little bit more painful as we start talking about funds that have been sort of promised to the community or talked about in terms of projects or expenditures have already been made, where we start to unravel a little bit of the commitments that we've already made.
And I will just add, similar to the process we just had for the mid-year, as the town manager brings forth the proposed operating budget, if we're still seeing something in the vicinity of a $2 billion deficit, if we're seeing something less, something more, whatever the outcome is as we move closer to June 30th, similar to tonight, we will bring some staff recommendations. Those recommendations would be discussed with the Finance Commission. They may add additional recommendations. And so you will have the benefit as we move into the closure of June 30th and then the new proposed budget of looking at this anew and thinking, what's the best thinking at the time to try and cure any potential deficit.
Thank you.
Okay, Vice Mayor?
If I could follow up on that, I'm a little confused because I thought the definition of our legal balanced budget had to be ongoing expenses balanced with ongoing revenues, and you just, I think, suggested taking one-time money to balance ongoing expenses.
We would typically, in that instance, if we were returning funds from a one-time use, such as in a capital project, we would probably use that money and link it to a one-time. Generally, in each fiscal year, we have one-time operating expenses that are just one-time in nature. The chief just mentioned one, the advanced license plate reader would be a purchase or an expenditure we might make once every 8 years. So we could use it. We could find selected targets of opportunity to use for one-time sources of funding, so that relieves the ongoing operating revenues from that burden. So that's typically what we do, council member.
Okay.
But you're right. We generally want all of our operating revenues to balance against all of our ongoing operating expenses.
Right. If we thought the effects of COVID were ongoing in nature and perpetuity, then you're right. We would have to be looking at fixes that provided some type of ongoing expense reduction. Currently, we think that's premature. We think there's still too much unknown related to COVID. And so that's why, from a staff perspective, we're currently still looking at one-time cures as opposed to looking at something that could impact service level.
Okay.
Thank you, Arn. That's true.
Any other questions? Councilmember Hudis.
Yeah, on I think page 3 of the staff report talks about an assumption of a 0% return on our investment. Why would that be 0? Is that realistic at this point?
Thank you for the question. So last year, when we were going through this process, in March of last year, the markets had taken a dramatic drop. And so staff has the ability, working with tools that CalPERS provides and also working with our actuary, to model something other. We don't need to wait for CalPERS at the end of the year. And so we have the ability to model what we think a return is. So in April, May of last year, the markets had still taken a pretty large dive. The one thing we knew was we were fairly certain they wouldn't hit 7%. And so for this conversation last year, we modeled a 0% return. At the end of the year, it ended up being a 4.7% return. And Director Conway, for this exercise tonight, he has modeled a 10% return for the year. Right now, CalPERS is up somewhere in the vicinity of 14%. And as we move, once again, this is one of the levers we'll use as we move towards June 30th and we start to get a better understanding of what their actual final return is going to be. We will then use that return as we continue to build the forecast.
Thank you. I would encourage engaging with Bartels and the Finance Commission to kind of analyze whether those are the right percentages for us to be using. I had a couple of questions. So we have a very simple chart in the middle of that page that shows the surplus or deficit over 5 years. I have to say that to me, to understand it, I believe that there is, while it shows a total of 1.4 million, we've already taken 800,000 from reserves in 2021. So that's really 2.2 million. And so I would wonder, is it possible when we're looking at this, and I know that some of it's in the detail, but to really focus on not only the surplus deficit bottom line, but have 3 lines above that showing the revenues over the 5 years, the expenditures over the 5 years, and the additions and subtractions from reserve that are projected over the 5 years, if there are any. Would that be possible?
It is possible, and there's a lot of information here, and unfortunately that means some of it ends up populated in different places. So attachment 2 has a lot of the granularity that you're asking for, which kind of shows that line item detail, expected transfers and things of that nature. We then try to roll it up, in kind of like this summary section to say, what does this mean? And then at the end of the report, where we kind of show at, once again, the high level, but it's total revenues, total expenses, what do the different scenarios mean, and how does that get us into a bottom line, either deficit or surplus situation?
Yeah, I understand, but for some of us who are looking to kind of look at it in one place, those seem to be the main things to look at, to understand, do we have, are we balancing the budget in a structural way? And so understanding what may be coming in or out of reserves, I think is important when we're looking at this. And there are some other suggestions as well, but I'll get off those in a minute.
And thank you for your feedback. I mean, we're always looking to improve our documents. At the end of the day, we create these documents for several audiences. We create them for our council. We create them for our community. And so any way that we can enhance what we're trying to communicate is greatly appreciated. And so thank you for that.
Vice Mayor?
So I have a question on page 224 of our report, and it looks like it's 16 of 19 for this section. The bottom table, UAL town contributions, the middle one, base investment return case 7%, and that's our UALs are based on a 7% return. So if we get a 7% return, you would expect our unfunded liability to not be growing. Can you explain the shape of the numbers here as we go through the table? It looks like it actually grows until we get to the last year, and then it drops off a little bit. Even though our investments are meeting our assumed return.
Right. So this table comes out of the CalPERS actuarial reports. And so what they tried to do is really create an illustration of the sensitivity to the UAL to changes in the investment rate of return. So CalPERS in here, they're already assuming certain demographic changes that have already been adopted by their board. They're assuming other changes. And so all of this is not necessarily, held equal. And so they are board adopted changes on their side, on the CalPERS side, that are embedded in here. But the purpose of this report was to show if we miss our investment return, what is the consequence to the town? Because the investment return is the largest determinant, unless they made a radical change to mortality tables or things like that. This is the largest determinant of what our unfunded actuarial liability payment is going to be year to year.
And so the last one on the table is a 1% return for every year for 5 years. That seems pretty unrealistic.
It's if you had a 1% return in the forecast period, what are the ripple effects on the UAL going forward?
And the forecast period being just next year, or?
This is exactly the data they provide in their table in the actuarial report. So they basically are just trying to help clients understand. And Bartel, we work with them to get a lot more information out of the CalPERS reports, and that information will be presented in March. But basically, CalPERS was trying to help clients understand the sensitivity of the discount rate and misses of the discount rate.
Okay, second question. Page 17 and 19, 225 on our iPad, the middle table, which has the surplus deficit total over the 5 years, those do not include any kind of pay raises, because we don't have any contracted pay raises at this time.
Correct. So when Director Conway and Gitta put this together, especially when we're in a period where we know we have MOUs expiring, we don't try to presuppose anything that the labor groups or our council will determine going forward. And so the only thing that's in the salary portion, and Director Conway, jump in if I'm wrong, but it's anything that's already been approved in an MOU in terms of a step increase and things of that nature. But we do not presuppose additional COLAs going forward when we have MOU contracts that are expiring.
And I understand that the sensitivity of doing that, because it kind of sends a message to the bargaining units kind of thing. So we wouldn't want to do that. But as council members or even the public looking at how do our finances look, it's very difficult to not have that in there. So even though you can't put it in the table, I as a council member feel like I need to be adding to the table when I look at it. So I'm looking for some direction whether this is, close or not. I would say, so if I look at our salaries, they're about 20 million. So if I wanted to assume, let's say, a 2% increase each year, maybe after 2021, say 21, 22. So let's say 2% after that, I would just add 0.4 million the first year, 0.8 million the next year, 1.2 the year after that to this to make, or well, not add, subtract, to create growing deficits, correct?
That's correct. You have approximately, you're using like 1% of 20 million would be 200,000. That's just salaries alone. And then there's associated PERS and other benefits. So the factor would be a little bit more than that, say maybe would be close to 1.8 or so. So because we have benefits that are associated with salaries. So it's not exact, but that's roughly correct, council member.
And so, go ahead.
I was going to say, we tried to provide a little bit of history because since we're not going to presuppose something going forward, we did show you kind of the history of bargaining units. And when you look at the history, all the units, for the most part, have basically been compensated in line or below inflation for the same period. And so in that regard, you can see that, what has been agreed to in the past has been pretty consistent with general inflation in the area or even below that.
But you haven't added inflation into this table, correct?
No, and that's where we differentiate. We tried to give a little bit of historic perspective, but then as we mentioned, we don't presuppose going forward.
And so as a council member, I could look at, in the scenario I said, by the 24-25, we could be negative over $1 million then in other words, somebody might look at this table and say, oh, we're going to get back to balanced budgets. But in fact, it's unrealistic to say that we're never going to give a raise again, and we aren't really going to get back to balanced budgets.
And all these variables are subject to change, which is kind of the point of the memo. The memo shows there's a lot of variability around the revenues, but you bring up a very good point. There's variability around the expense side also.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Councilmember Hudis?
I agree with the Vice Mayor's comments, and the challenge in trying to understand our forecast with some things that are missing. I understand reasons why they're missing, but and I've read carefully the debate about using the forecast to forecast or budget to budget comparisons, using the general fund versus looking at total actual expenses, expenditures, and revenues for the town. And I think at some point we really need to look at the picture of what has really happened with the expenditures and the revenues for the town as a whole. I also think that, you know, the forecast itself is doesn't show really a capital plan, and so an ongoing capital plan and how it's going to be funded. And I know the Vice Mayor had made a suggestion about using the Measure G sales tax, and I believe Councilman Risto also referenced that. I think that's a start, but I do think that in looking and developing our forecast, we need to incorporate our long-term capital plan, and including, you know, taking on the challenge of understanding where the funding is going to come from for those things. So my point is that I don't see this being mutually exclusive between using the budget to budget methodology and looking at the actual and the whole picture. I think they are two different perspectives, and we should see both of those perspectives. I understand the value of the budget to budget, but I also understand the value of looking at our actuals and our total expenditures as well, particularly as we're facing financial challenges. So I guess I could boil it down to a question about, you know, in future forecast analysis, is it possible to incorporate some of these other suggestions from the Council and the Finance Commission?
And I'm going to say yes. You may notice in the mid-year report that we just received, staff significantly enhanced kind of the history with expenses the way we used to traditionally do with revenues. And so we do have the historic expense record there. And then with the forecast, we show what we're projecting out. I think it would be relatively easy to meld those two together and then have something that puts it all in one place. And so I think, you know, this year we enhanced the mid-year. I think taking those enhancements and adding them to the 5-year forecast will hopefully achieve some of what folks have been, you know, asking for, including our council members.
Right. Well, I would be supportive of that. I'm looking forward to working with the Finance Commission on bringing some of that perspective to our forecasting.
But just in terms of, you know, kind of the history of the town. And so when you discuss the history of expenses and revenues, obviously, whatever you choose as a start date and you choose as an end date is going to end up determining the story. So out of our own intellectual curiosity, we went back and looked at the 2002-2003 CAFR, which is the first time we created a GASB statement of activities per GASB. And if you look at that into 2020, basically expenses increased in the vicinity of around 63%. Revenues increased in the vicinity of about 61%, which you would expect fairly well paired as an entity. Otherwise, we would not be an ongoing entity. And it's once again kind of in line with inflation during that same time period. And so we agree that, you know, we can do a better job of providing more historic data. But when you do start to look at the data, depending on what time period you look at, it does seem as if, you know, there's been consistent decisions made out through the prior councils to make sure that we always maintain a balanced budget going forward.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think as we are looking for this council and this finance commission to help manage through a time that is going to be unpredictable and potentially quite challenging financially, that that this is a good time to start doing that.
Any other questions before I go to the public? Vice Mayor.
Actually, let's go to the public first, and then mine was really a comment.
Okay. And so my attendees, I have 4 attendees. Again, this is specific to the 5-year forecast. Would anyone like to speak to this item? Seeing none, I will close public testimony. And Vice Mayor, you had a comment/question?
So this item said that they wanted direction on preparing the budget. I'm scratching my head, and as Councilmember Huda said, I kind of would look for more suggestions from the Finance Commission. But the one thing that does come to my mind is understanding the trends. We have had comments from the public, and like Mr. Andrews said, depending on where you start and end, you get much different results. But it is useful to look and understand what is the trend. So I would challenge staff to maybe think up some ways of showing us the trends, and that maybe that means showing different start and stop years. Maybe it means figuring out how to remove certain exceptional items. I don't know what it is, but actually I'm saying, I would prefer maybe a couple different scenarios, because everyone gives a different result. And then you're just going to get criticisms. Oh, well, you didn't do this in that one. But if you do 3 or 4 different ways of creating trends, it helps us kind of, it's like a computer simulation where you run different simulations and you get different results, and you kind of see what's the clustering result and I'm not saying you need to quite go that extreme of running, many different simulations, but think about some ways to show us trends in multiple ways that we can kind of in our own minds extrapolate what we really think the trends are, and how badly we might be in trouble.
And thank you for that, because often we do not highlight some of the positive things. And so there are a couple trends in this report that are actually very encouraging. For instance, on attachment 2, if you look at the line item just after total operating expenses, it says GASB 45 retiree medical actuarial. We start at numbers of approximately 600,000 and go down to 200,000. And in prior years, those were closer to 800,000. And this is a direct result of starting to fund the OPEB liability in 2009, and then our labor groups partnering with us to eliminate retiree health care prospectively going forward. So you are seeing some positive trends there. I would also point out that if you look at CalPERS, it seems as if the slope of that trend is flattening, and that is a direct result of the ADPs that the prior councils have done. That's the direct result of some other, mitigation measures that have been done. And so we are starting to see some positive trends. Now, once again, with anything actuarial in nature, it's all dependent on, if CalPERS decides to make any other changes. But there are some areas, and I appreciate you saying that, because we could highlight some positive trends while we're also trying to see where our challenging trends are.
Councilmember Risto.
Yes, thank you. Following up on what Councilmember Rennie or Vice Mayor Rennie was talking about, what I'm thinking is it's probably going to be easier in terms of making decisions moving forward to look at trends in expenses, because we kind of can understand that. The trends on revenue, I would think, would be full of exceptions in terms of getting a grant or, different sources of income, or gee, Netflix is no longer doing discs, they're streaming, and we don't get sales tax from that, or a company leaves, or, you can think of endless things where that's going to be up and down and going to be much harder to predict, including the fact that we understand so little about what might happen. We know what we'd like to happen with COVID. We'd like the vaccination to move out. We'd like everything to open and stay open, but we don't know what will happen with variants. We don't know what other issues will happen. So I think from the perspective of making the best use of staff's time, I think would be more critical to look at the trends and expenses so that we can understand if we have to make an adjustment in the future, where we might have to make an adjustment in our costs, if that makes sense.
It does, and thank you for that feedback, because once again, I think we can build on some work we've already been doing to try and get better illustrations out there for our decision makers in our community.
Thank you.
Councilmember Hudis.
Yeah, thank you. In order to make good decisions, we need to see the information and all of the information. And so I would not necessarily just take a focus on only expenses, but understanding, if there is a trend, and it seems like it's a negative trend, a negative situation, just understanding what are the drivers of that and having a discussion about it, to me, is the most important thing that we can take away from this. So when we're only looking forecast to forecast, we just don't see those things. And so, so I think that we want to just enhance our information that we're seeing to understand what are the drivers. For instance, I know that we've added some staff in the area of transportation, and that's an expense that is well offset by the grants that we've been taking in. So those are the kinds of things that I think are important to understand. The reasons for increasing expenses and the reasons for having enhanced revenues that are not just our tax flow revenues, but the grants and other things. I think that really should be the purview. And looking at this from the perspective of the council and how the town is doing financially overall. So just encourage, I know it's more work, but we do have a finance commission. And I think when we saw that the finance commission, the ballot measure passed, we also, I think, recognize, at least I recognize, that it's going to take more resource to support the kind of work that we're asking the finance commission to do. And that we need to step it up a bit, and maybe including in terms of the resources that we have traditionally devoted to this process, because a small amount of analysis here can help the town stay out of some really big trouble. So we've activated the community to help us. And I would also encourage us to make sure that staff has enough resource to support some of the things that we're asking for.
Thank you for that, council member, because you raise a very important point. Not all expenses are bad. Most expenses are an investment. And you brought up the mobility manager, which we advocated for that position in 2017-18. And that position is already a multiple X of that position in terms of the grant funding that they have found. We advocated for a position in 1920 last year for an additional resource for our finance team so that we can enhance that transparency. And so I appreciate you recognizing that not all expenses are bad, and some of them are investments in our community and the quality of work that we provide.
Any other comments? Councilmember Badami.
Thank you. So the Finance Commission so far, apparently it's a success. I did listen to the audio and I did read the comments in our staff reports tonight. So my question is, if we're going to look for more information from the Finance Commission so that we could make better decisions, how often do they plan on meeting?
So they adopted a resolution at their first meeting. At a minimum, they're planning on meeting monthly. And they were very gracious to slide their meeting in between our two council meetings, recognizing the amount of work that our council members need to do to prepare for their meetings, and then also on the staff side. So they'll be meeting the second Tuesday of every month with the understanding that if they don't need a meeting, they always have the ability to cancel it. Or conversely, if we need additional meetings, we can put on special meetings. But it's a minimum of monthly currently.
Great, thank you.
I just want to echo, and I won't repeat what my colleagues have said, but what we're realizing is the variability, and so I appreciate the constant communication with regard to the budget, and that there will be a lot of flexibility that will be asked of council as well as staff as we have more information presented to us. And I do want to basically commend not only the staff for the work that they've been doing, our residents that have been looking into this. But I think, Mr. Andrews, you said something, and it's just like not all expenses are bad. And I think what we're trying to do is we're trying to find that the value that we're providing to our community is really embedded within our staff, as all of you have pointed out, that those expenses are necessary. They provide the high level of service. And so the message that I do want to make sure that our community receives is that as we take a critical look at our finances, it's to ensure that we continue the high quality of service that all of you provide. And for that, we are grateful. Colleagues, any specific direction? I know we've shared our thoughts in the last agenda item as well as this. It sounds like there's just more opportunities on a monthly basis, but I will look again if there's anything specific. Now's the time. It sounds like staff has what they need, and I'm seeing nods.
This was really a reality check. If our council thought that the Finance Commission was off base, concurring with staff, or if you thought staff, was, perhaps off base on one of the elements, it was just an opportunity for our council to weigh in. But as I've mentioned, you're going to have multiple opportunities to weigh in again.
Wonderful. Thank you. Okay, well then I will, seeing no other comments, I will close this agenda item. And as I mentioned earlier, for those that did want to speak to us under verbal communications, now is the time to do so. You'll have 3 minutes again, as we did in the beginning. I know Ms. Hogan stayed on. So if you'd like to speak to us, please do so. And if we could have 3 minutes, I believe there were 2 speakers remaining, so 3 minutes each.
Okay, sorry, we had to get unmuted. I'm sorry. So I'm really just, I'm devastated right now, and I'm really sidetracked by all that I've been listening to you speak about these issues of the town council that you're dealing with, and I'm really confused about the signs you put downtown, stopping people from going there without a mask. I don't see the value in that, period. But let me just get on to this, and my point in question is, why are you not telling these businesses that there are laws they are breaking by forcing people to cover their mouth and their nose, the only way they can get air? Seriously, I live with a chronic condition from mercury toxic poisoning, okay? For one. So I've struggled going to my bank. I've struggled going into Safeway just to get food for myself, being told to wear a mask on top of having a shield on, and they look at me and treat me like I'm some kind of criminal over a virus that is, my personal opinion, and I know there's medical doctors that'll back me up on this, is a pandemic. Okay, it's not real. It is intimidation by force of laws, of mandates that aren't even laws, guidelines that are to suit. Okay, I'm just way off track here. These laws that are passed by legislative branches of the government, not the governor. No governor can make a law. No mayor can make a law. No health officer can make a law. No business owner can make a law. You cannot require somebody to wear a mask and cover their only means of breathing air. You do not tell them. I see so many businesses have gone out of business because of these mandates that you guys are enforcing. You are enforcing them. I don't see how that's a value to the Los Gatos community or any business owner. You guys, and I'm going to bring your wages up to $200,000 a year minimum. I don't see this affecting you guys in the slightest. Of course, you're not out on the streets dealing with this stuff, are you? You don't see how people are treating each other. Conquer and divide and conquer. That's what I see, and it's working. You guys you're definitely going to benefit this, I'm sure, from this. You need to let these business owners know. What? I don't care if you let them know or not. You know what? I'm going to take it on my responsibility, and I'm going to let them know they are breaking the law, and they can be taken to court for that because they are following rules and mandates that you made, thinking they're laws, and forcing them to close down their businesses. They're a family-owned business they've had for years. You don't care about their welfare. All you care about is meeting your little budget. For what kind? What's in your budget? Your salaries? You know, I mean, I don't get it. You know, the policemen's salaries, this is tyranny. It is straight tyranny. I'm sorry, I just can't even see. I'm pointing with you people. It is fraud at best. Thank you so much. I have no faith in you or any political body of this government. None. None. It's all lies. I see. You look, you guys are all sitting there with straight faces thinking you're not helping the community whatsoever. You are harming the community. You are harming the community. You don't feel the effects of nothing. Nothing at all. Yeah, drive your nice cars, live in your nice houses, don't pay property taxes, whatever. Who knows? Who cares? You know what? You do what you think is right.
Okay. And the next speaker.
That's it from our side.
Okay. Okay, well, thank you very much. As mentioned under verbal communications, this is always an opportunity for anyone to share their views. Anyone that ever wants to question the legality, our town attorney is always welcome to meet with any community members to explain the legalities of what we do on a regular basis. Colleagues, thank you, and staff, thank you for your time today. Meeting's adjourned.